Hey you, thanks so much for tuning in to Applegate's EDGEcast powered by Exit Zero Communications. Today, we want to turn on your thinking to ways that events and your business can be improved with great ideas for maximizing your profit. We'll examine forensic deep dives and explore behind the curtains to see what's really behind the art and science of profitable and productive event management. The fun part for me is I'll be joined by my friends who I've met at events along the way. My goal is to interview cool, smart people who are creative and experts in their field. The hope for those of you who invest their time in Exit Zero moving forward is that you'll use what you've learned to create your own personal or business success first or next success story, In this way, you too can jane it forward. There's a couple of rules I have for the show. It's basically a conversation among friends. There's a minimum of editing, so it's basically very raw. Guests must agree to not take themselves too seriously. We want this to be a fun show where we're just sharing information that we've learned at events and through our experience along the way. It's easier for us to learn it and teach it to you than you have to learn it for yourselves, at an event. All topics will be explored on the show through my personal success story or business process called Applegate's Edge, in which we energize your vision and then strategically design profitable strategies for growing and elevating your business and personal lives. So recent episodes of the show are available at businesseventpro.com. And then older versions of the show or episodes are available on YouTube at Applegate's Edge. So please subscribe, because that's what's going to help us grow, grow the story. So now for the fun part of the show. In the words of William Wordsworth, to begin, begin. And so today we have a guest, Rita McKenzie. She is an event coordinator or a co-producer for the National Railroad Contractors Association annual meeting. And Rita and I actually have known each other for quite a long time, and you're going to be hearing about how we met in detail, or the project that we worked on in the past. But we met, she was a client of mine when I was an account executive at a video production company many, many years ago. And Rita and her team came to us with a problem that we had to figure out how to solve. And that was communicating to arborists across the nation. So Rita, before we get into more detail about that, first of all, thank you so much for joining me today on Applegate's EDGEcast. Again, we haven't talked for a long time, and it's been fun kind of reconnecting based on what's coming on the show. But with that, I'd like to, ask you a little bit about, or ask you about that first project that we did and the problem that you were given that you then came to us and asked us to solve.
Well, our project had to do with teaching arborists about proper pruning practices. Yep. And so we wanted to make an interactive video, which nobody had done before. Everything was just in book form or on paper. And yep. So we wanted to make it, your team created a branch opening up and the leaf coming out, and very, very cutting edge material back then called CG.
Yes, or in that case, yeah, I'm sorry. In that case, it was animation, Rita, where it was moving graphics would be animation compared to static graphics, which would be CG.
Right. Yeah. So, we had 9 modules, I believe, proposed, and every time we turned around, there was something new, like I think it was MPEG was new. And so we were trying to work on that and insert that. And I mean, it was a total learning experience for everybody. And it did seem like we were right on the beginning of it. And because of that, we had a budget, and we were given money by another organization as a grant. And so we proposed that to you, and you guys said, sure, we'll do it. And unfortunately, it did cost a lot more than we expected. The filming, the editing, the whole thing was a lot more expensive. And because the technology just kept jumping forward, it's like, well, wait a minute, we could do it this way instead of that way, because that way would be old by the time we do it. But all of that ended up costing much more money, costing you guys time and money. And so we ended up running out of time and money and didn't finish it, which was unfortunate, because it was a cool project, I thought.
I actually left the company. I think the first module was about done. We were getting ready to finish that up. I think it was maybe in testing, maybe. But again, stepping back. So the problem was teaching arborists proper pruning methods, right? And so doing that across the nation, repeatable, the teaching had to be repeatable. There was testing involved. So we created a CD, and at that point in time, CDs weren't even they weren't even out yet. I know we're aging ourselves a bit here, but again, CDs weren't even out yet. And then your boss, Dr. Harvey Holt, professor at, he was the dean of the School of Forestry at Purdue University, as I believe that was his title.
He wasn't the dean, he was a full professor at the
department. I love Harvey. And I know that he was a very forward thinker. And I knew he came to you and he'd go, how are we going to do this, Rita? And then you would have to figure out how to do it, right? And
it was sort of, yes, it was like that. Can't we, and like the famous term was, can't we just do this?
Yes,
like, do this. Do you know what this means?
Yes,
and that was
classic, the non-definition of this, right?
Right.
And so what was so cool though was when we did the project, I mean, obviously it was a challenge because it was new for everyone. But we had full interactivity. So people could, students who were going through the program, they would actually, they would get the training, and then they would actually then get tested on the training. And if they couldn't pass the test, then they would not be able to advance. Well, in today's world, that's not that big of a deal. But then that was not happening at that time. We were you talked about it the other day, we were very, very cutting edge. You were very cutting edge with your thinking, and then we were trying to figure out how to meet your need as a company. So thank you for giving your trust to us, because that was definitely a challenging project. There's no question about that.
It was a lot of fun, even though it didn't get finished. It still was a huge learning curve for me, and it kind of propelled us into the possibilities for future things. Even though we didn't get to finish that one, it was like, well, what can we do with other things, knowing this new technology is coming along. So it was, it was very helpful in that sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then, and not only was it interactive, you mentioned it had full animation. It had there was so many different pieces and parts. There was a lot of raw footage that was shot. Then there was a lot of material that you guys provided. So it was all about, telling that again, solving the problem up front, figuring out how are we going to communicate this teaching, if you will. And that was because of what the organization, or who the organization was. It required, actually, these people needed to be certified. So that's why the testing was so important. And, with what's gone on with COVID and things, and national meetings canceled now, which you actually had experienced last year on another project that you're working on, that sort of added some new challenges to those organizations who are providing certification. And I think that might be kind of a neat place to kind of switch over and talk about the real purpose of you being a guest today on the EDGEcast is to talk about your experience with the National Railroad Contractors Association and the annual meeting. I know that I had reached out to you to ask you about, what are you doing? What are you working on these days? And you told me you were now producing or helping to produce this program. And so one of my questions to you was, well, what was the biggest challenge when you were starting to produce that project? Do you have would you like to share that at this time, Rita?
Oh, I think the biggest challenge was making, getting all the facets of the group who were working on this, because
Right.
I did the event planning, the meals, and actually the meals is what was my job. Somebody
That's-
else did the educational portion, another person did the certification, and then another group did our registration. So it's combining all 4 of those units together to make sure that the program goes well. And we have run into a couple of issues over the last few years of one part of the group was not living up to their part of the bargain, which makes it very difficult, because you do have to have a team approach, and everybody have defined goals, and everybody working towards the same end, getting the training for this group. And one of the biggest hurdles for an event with that is almost 99% men, is making sure that the food is good and suitable for what they like. I mean, you can't serve soup and salad to this particular group of guys, so you have to know your excuse me, know your audience, and provide for them. Yeah, another thing is the men do not like to sit close together. So when you have a room, you have to make sure that it is large enough, and then communicating that to the event people. We had this at the convention center, and so working with them, explaining to them that we need 120, we need room for 120, but they can't be side by side. Right. So you have to have almost kind of like double the space. If a room that fits 240, because they're going to be sitting at every other chair. And so, it's just little things like that, because you want your audience to feel comfortable, and when they go away, that they're happy with everything. So that's a big challenge.
Right. Now, in this particular, so this is an annual meeting, as I understand, correct? Right. And this is also a meeting where training is happening such that certification would be provided. Is that also correct?
Yes, right.
Okay.
The first 2, it's a 4-day program, and the first 2 days are focused on the training, so that the men can take their certification test. And it is reciprocated across about 40 states. And so the certification person works with those 40 states to make sure that that what we teach them meets their requirements. So that's a big challenge for her. Like I said, she's a big part of the program, and thank goodness she has the wherewithal to deal with all those people. I'm not sure if I could, because sometimes they'll change who's in charge, and so one year they'll say, oh yeah, those credits were good for the same talk. Next year they'll go, oh no, we don't like that. It's like, but you gave us credit last year. Well, that was so and so. So her part of the project is very important, and because otherwise the men would have to, or the companies would have to take their men around to all the different states. This way they can come to one place and get their certification, and then they're done with it. Then they can go about their job.
Got it. So certification. So lots of industries require ongoing education, right? So like the legal industry, I suspect the financial services industries, certainly education, arborists, rail line workers, folks that do tree trimming, right? Arborists my nephew works for an electrical company and an energy company to go out and clear the lines and things like that. Mm-hmm. So in that case, it's there's usually a collaboration with if either the organization will provide the credits, or there is a third party educator who is then
Mhm.
providing what are known as CEUs. And so those are, what is a CEU? It's
Yeah, it's a
education unit. Something like
continuing
that.
education unit.
Continuing education unit. Yeah, I'm so
Yes.
sorry. I
Now,
remember that.
yeah, and like I said, it's a 4-day program, and the first 2 days are the educational portion for the men to take the test. Well, and
Right.
the next 2 days are speakers from around the country
Right.
that come in to talk about some aspect of the weed control program that all the men are involved in. And so that's, they get, if you pass the test on Monday and Tuesday, after that, then you can get sort of CEUs, but people sometimes just come for the CEU. So there's a larger group for the next 2 days, and they haven't they don't need to take the test because they are continuing to get the CEUs.
Right, right. Well, kind of stepping back, I mean, one of the reasons that I thought it'd be interesting to chat with you today is, again, you represent this national organization, right? And so, you know, a lot of times when when those types of organizations have these meetings, then people, you know, they might, especially if there's certification involved, people have to go, right?
Right.
And
Yes.
so I know that one of the challenges that you have is just the, you know, who's really going to show, and then who's going to show for the meals, which is one of your main responsibilities.
Right.
Do you have any rules of thumb any percentages that you typically use? I mean, there's some industry standards, but in this case, with you know, an association meeting, people are supposed to come to get their credits. How do you deal with the food count issue, Rita? I know, because it's always one of the biggest concerns and expenses and fears that strike in the hearts of event planners.
Absolutely. Yes, I've been involved with other organizations where the people who are attending, like the Indiana Arborists Association. Okay, the people who are attending are individual companies or just one man coming for training and to get CEUs, and they pay a fee, obviously, to come and eat. Okay, well, since it's coming out of their pocket directly, they don't miss meals. And so if you have 100 people coming that have signed up, then 100 people are eating. You know, give or take 10%.
Right.
But for this organization, the people who are paying for it are the managers of the company, and they tell the guys that you're going to go and be, to take this test and forget certification. But the money doesn't come out of those individual men's pockets. So sometimes they decide to sleep in late. They don't come to breakfast, or they decide that they don't want it. They didn't like the meal yesterday, so they're not gonna come for dinner. And it's no skin off skin off their nose or no money out of their pockets, so they just don't show up.
Right.
And so I have sometimes reduced it by 20%, and that
Wow.
still didn't work. And so what I did, and even I thought this was going to work perfectly. Had them fill out a sheet that said they were coming, which meals they were going to come to. Okay. Well,
Yeah.
still again, the managers would sign and say, yeah, they're coming for every meal. Well, the guys don't show up. And there's nobody that goes in their rooms and says, hey, you got to come to the meals. So that does bother me a lot. I hate to have the food wasted, but on the other side, if I cut it back 20-25% and they decide to show up, then people might not be able to eat. And
Yes.
that bothers me a lot. And so I tend to err on the side of more people basically losing money, 120 meals and only 100 or maybe 90 show up. So we got 30 meals that aren't eaten. But, I personally, I'd rather do that than to have somebody stand there and there's no plate, there's no place at the table for them.
Right.
So it depends on the organizations. Like I said, the arborist, because it's coming out of their individual pocket, they never miss a meal. Where this other group where the people don't have to, they're not paying, their managers are paying, and so they don't really care. They'd rather have pizza, so they just go to the room and order pizza.
Right.
And we've talked about this at the board meetings, and essentially, there's no way to guarantee, so just have to guess.
Right. I just
Which
had
is
a conversation.
frustrating.
Yeah. I had a conversation with a woman last night who had envisioned an event for her, she's a board member of a not-for-profit organization, and she had envisioned an event to create a new experience for people who would come. They've never had a chance to have this type of experience at this building before. And she was very excited about it, but then a conflict came because other people in the organization said, hey, if we're going to have them on property, let's try to sell them on this other thing that we offer. And they wanted to include hors d'oeuvres because that was one of the services that were offered, right?
Sure.
Well, then
Yeah.
all of a sudden, this free event, for 2 or 3 hours that required just some staff to be there to welcome people and educate, shake hands and interact with the guest and quote unquote, sell, because that's what they're there for, really. Selling the building or whatever, we're using the space. Then all of a sudden it became, well, then we would have to have registration. Well, then we have to, because if not, we're just going to be serving food and we have no idea how many. And then it became so cumbersome and so scary because of the unknown that they just pulled the event.
Oh, yeah.
Which, was unfortunate because, I, as a community member, really would have liked to have gone to that event. That didn't happen. But anyway, also any thoughts, Rita, in terms of like, when it comes to count on food, and that it's just such a big expense line item within an, in-person event. What about buffet or plated?
Well, for this group, and I guess also for the arborists, because they're mostly men as well. Buffets seem to work better because one of the complaints I got this last, it was in January, was that the servings were not big enough. And so I thought, well, they're big enough for me, but they're not big enough for most men. And so I decided that from now on, we'll just have buffets, and that way they can put as much food on the plate as they want to. The buffets are a little more expensive, but that's pleasing your, the objective is for your customers or attendees to be happy. And one of the things that makes people happy is food. And so if you have to spend a little bit more to accomplish that goal, then that's just the best, because your objective is to make them happy, or at least I think so. The customer is always right. And in this case, the men deserve, they're taking time out from their work, they're away from their families. In this case, some events are within a small place where you're going home at night, where they're coming for 4 days. So they're away from their family, they're away from lots of places. And so making them happy with the food is good. And I guess one of the thoughts I had as we were talking is, well, in regard to what your example there was, lack of communication or clear goals of what the event is supposed to be. It almost sounds like this was like haphazard, just put together at kind of the last minute. Nobody knew for sure what they wanted to accomplish. And so, having good goals, and I don't know whether I mentioned it before, but each one of those people that are involved in the program has to have defined responsibilities. Yes. And know that, and not, this is my job, that's your job. I'm going to stay away from your part of the job, you stay away from my part of the job, and and we're happy. So that, I think, makes a clear communication and defined roles makes for a very good experience for the organizers as well as for the people attending the conference.
Absolutely. And When you talk about communication, I mean, it's between partners. Like your event is because of the way the various organizations that are involved and the various partners that need to be at the table, you know, there's some big players involved, right? And so, but then, and there are different people who have key roles in producing the event. But then there's, and so, you know, as you just alluded to, communicating with it, you know, to each other, making sure that, hey, I set you up for success, but I'm going to let you do what you need to do to be successful, right? You know,
right.
And hopefully your partners are doing the same thing for you. But, you know, to our listeners and viewers today, that partner, you know, relationship is so vital, whether it's your venue partner or your food planning partner, or maybe you are working with a third party conference partner, you know, like, I don't know, I can't think of an example in that regard, but separate from a venue. But the point is that, I mean, media, certainly, like if you have a public event, obviously keeping the media in the loop and communicating with them is super important. But then also just making sure that you're like, you know, as the planner, you know, making sure that you have things in writing so that should something happen to you, the event goes on without you and can be a success. That's super important too.
Well, that's true. In fact, it was brought up by one of the people in our little group, the guy who does the education, the certification, and I do the meals, that if one of us couldn't be there, could the other ones take over that job? And so that was like, ooh, it's a little scary. Because the person who does the certification, especially the states, are so adamant about keeping, well, they want to make sure that it's the guys are getting the credits that they're supposed to, and that it doesn't conflict with any of their rules over in their particular state. And so, I mean, she has to sign every single page herself. She can't designate it to somebody else because they would get very upset. So, you know, if she wasn't able to be there, you know, it was just a subject that came up last year, and it was like, oh, I don't know what we would do. You know, I could probably take over for the educational person, because at that point on site, all he's doing is introducing people.
Right.
And he could probably take over for me with the food, you know, because that's already been taken care of. But on site, it is, but for the certification, that is I don't know whether we need to have a contingency plan for that. I don't know, you know, what would happen. So, you know, that's not a bad thing to think about as an organizer, you know, even though it may never happen. It's like, what would we do if one of us couldn't show up? Well, our program is in January in Indiana, which is a possibility of snowstorms, ice storms, whatever. And it's never been canceled in the 35, 40 years because of the weather. One time they did get snowed in after the program was over, but you know, and it's not so much the people who are attending, but the speakers. If they don't show up, then that means that they don't get the certification for that.
Right.
And in this day and age with Zoom, we had one speaker, because of COVID, decide he didn't want to travel. So we were able to set him up with a Zoom call. That actually, it was interesting, because I sit in the back kind of watching the whole thing. As soon as that Zoom came on and there's no person standing in front, it was like we lost half of the audience. They all looked down at their phones, because it was on Zoom. They didn't have a real person to look at, which it was an interesting experience. So
absolutely,
for that group, I would probably never use Zoom unless it was absolutely necessary, such as in this case, because we lost most of them. without somebody standing in front. And then, like I said, that was something absolutely brand new. And so it made us realize, we can't do this. You know, the possibility of having Zoom calls presentations instead of actual people coming, we thought, well, that would work. Well, this was an example that showed us that wasn't going to work for this particular audience.
Right.
And it may work for other people, but knowing your audience, like I said, for all kinds of things, where they like to sit, what they like to eat, their attention span. I mean, we have a break after every speaker because they're not the kind, they don't sit all day. They're up and about all the time. So you have to take that into consideration too. So knowing your audience is really, really important.
Very, very good advice. And it's just so true and can't be repeated enough, actually. So
Yes,
excellent. So you talked about knowing your audience. We've talked about food. We've talked about partners. We've talked about communication. We've talked about continuing educational units and strategies that a national organization or association puts in place to reach out to their members and to keep their members certified, if you will, and keep their education up to speed. Is there anything that we haven't touched on today, Rita, that you would like to add for our guests or viewers?
Oh, let's see. I'm looking at my notes. Actually, I think we've just about covered everything.
We had a great conversation, that's for sure, today.
Yes.
So yeah, so Rita went from being faculty at Purdue University, then has gone on to support the Indiana Arborist Association, the National Arborist Association, now the National Railroad Contractors Association. So there's lots of those organizations out there. And, I mean, when I first got involved with you, I'm like, what is an arborist? Well, what do they do? Why do we got to teach them how to trim trees? And
Yeah.
I will never forget the day that we sat in a parking lot and literally, as an account executive, because I was there with the client, and we were teaching spray patterns for spraying weed control, right? And so we would spray it and then video it and then wait for it to dry. And so I checked in with the office. They said, what are you doing? I'm like, waiting for poison to dry. And they're like, what? I'm like, leave it to Purdue.
I think I do remember that. Yeah. The spray pattern and then wait and spray another one. We were spraying water actually at that time.
I know. We were spraying, I know, but it was supposed to be showing how the poison would be applied correctly without damage to the.
Let's not say poison. The organization.
I'm sorry. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I apologize. Weed control.
It does kill things, but it kills. Well, that's something I really learned when I started with this organization, that you think weeds really don't matter that much on a railroad track, but they do. I mean, a train, if there's weeds on the track, the train can't move because it's too slippery. It's like this millions of tons, I don't know how much they weigh, can't move because of weeds on the track. And also there's a man called a track master, and he rides in a little car, and he's listening the whole time he's driving for the other track. And if he hears something that doesn't sound right, he gets out and he checks to see if the bolts are in place and if there's weeds, so it is an important function of for movement of goods throughout their country. And so something I learned, because I didn't know much about it in the beginning, but I've gradually begun to see how important it is to have weed control on railroad tracks, and how important these guys are to the industry and to the safety of trains as well as the people who work around train. So it's a professional job. And that's the other thing we try to instill in them, that this is a professional organization. They're not just weed sprayers, you know, it is an important function that they have. I mean, everybody in the world has, whatever they do is an important function. Otherwise things wouldn't happen. So I've learned that along the way.
Right. Well, thank you for that. And this event is important to them, right? Because that's the time for them to get together, you know, to network, to learn, and to get certified and keep doing their business. So it's a very important event. So yeah,
it is. Yes. So
the one thing I regret that I never got to do, and you know this, is I never got to ride in the rail truck on the lines with Dr. Holt. That was always something I really wanted to do, and never got to not to do that perspective, but maybe someday I'll get to do that.
Well, I have to tell you a little story about, we had another research project where we were going along, I think it was the Canadian Pacific Railroad, and we were every 5 miles, my job, and actually we had like 3 different groups. My job was riding in one of these Trackmasters cars and getting out and taking a picture every 5 miles. Okay. And the guy said, "You are the first woman to ever ride in a Trackmaster," you know. And in fact, I would get transferred from one section to another, and I'd walk into the room where several other people were, you know, men were waiting for something, and they'd look at me like, "Who is this?" You know. But I felt really, but I felt really special that I was the first woman, maybe the only one, to ever ride in these little cars. But that was fascinating, because he could hear when something wasn't right, because he'd been doing this for so long. So
Wow.
that was, yeah. So you didn't get to ride in the high rail. I got to ride in this Trackmaster. So, you know, claim to fame.
I love it. Well, Rita, thank you again so much for joining me today, and good luck as you continue planning your next annual meeting for the Railroad Contractors Association. We definitely do want feedback on the show today, guests. It's super important that we know what people are interested in learning about. You can find us again on businesseventpro.com, a new website, just only a couple months old. I'm super excited about that. And also you can find other episodes of Applegate's EDGEcast. Today's podcast can be found either on the website or older versions on Applegate's Edge on YouTube. So please subscribe again. And we hope you want more information about Exit Zero and how we can help you with creating events or projects or programs from soup to nuts, or work with you to make your events or projects better, or to teach you how to do your own projects from scratch. And while showing you the tools and the strategies behind the art and science of profitable and productive event planning. You know, it's Rita and I've talked about it earlier in the show. There's so much fear when doing events, especially when you don't have any experience doing them, or if you've only done a couple or whatnot. A niece of mine recently, very, very, very intelligent, capable girl, was all worried because she'd been given the assignment of doing a national event for her corporation. And I just looked at her, I'm like, "Oh, that's no big deal." And she looked at me and she's like, "Are you kidding me? It's $150,000 budget." And she was just completely like in tears. She was so upset. And to me, that was like so easy. That was like, but again, I've been doing it for lots and lots of years. So I hope that I can teach others moving forward. And maybe Exit Zero isn't for you. That's okay. Certainly there's lots of folks who know a lot more about event planning than I do. There's no worries there, but I know that you know somebody who can use this information to help with their confidence in improving their first or next event experience. But with that, if you do know someone who wants to grow event revenue or membership or sales or be profitable in some other way, we'd certainly like to hear from them. And in fact, or share our information with them. In fact, I'll soon be announcing yet another new project coming. I got a virtual event coming soon, working out the details of the date of that. And we do have another show scheduled next week. So we hope you'll tune back to listen more about the tools and techniques behind the art and science of profitable and productive event management. So in the meantime, make sure that we have your deets so you can find out more. And remember that strategic intention matters. So ciao for now. Thanks for coming. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks.